Welcome everyone to Talks with Sato, the weekly spaces/podcast where we talk with people. Every week we bring you someone that is either involved in developing something on Bitcoin, working on Bitcoin, or just doing something interesting in the world of Bitcoin. And we are trying to engage with as many people as possible from as many different ecosystems as possible and just get a sense of what is happening in the world of Bitcoin. We are of the belief that there has never been a more exciting time to be involved in the space. There is an unprecedented level of experimentation. There's an unprecedented level of innovation. And today we have the pleasure of talking with Jacob, who not only runs a podcast similar to ours, literally called Built on Bitcoin, which is we recommend it very much if you want to keep in touch with everything that's been developed in the space. And he's also involved with the BTC Frontier Fund. So we are very excited to have you, Jacob, today and to talk about everything that you've been doing. I think because of your podcast and your role in the Frontier Fund, I think you have a unique perspective on what's happening. And I personally been following your content for a while now, and I think it's great. And I always learn something new because you're always posting about a lot of different things. Like myself, you are. I think, and maybe you can correct me if I am wrong, but you don't seem to be super focused on one area of Bitcoin, which most people do. But you have this holistic approach, which is the same that we are trying to do. So I am very much looking forward to this conversation. So yeah, I'm just gonna give you a few minutes just for you to say hi, introduce yourself, and maybe tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get to do where you are now.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for having me up, and yeah, hearing your little like blurb about what your guys' mission statement is definitely resonates with me heavily. It's pretty much how I see my podcast as well, which is that there's a lot of podcasts that are Bitcoin focused, but they go down the maxi-ish line of thinking, or they go like very financial and economic theory-esque, which has its place. I find that stuff very interesting as well, but it misses a lot of what I think is also very interesting, which is that there's a ton of people building either on the L1 or on the periphery that don't get a lot of limelight, which is a shame. And so I definitely resonate with what you guys are doing. So it only makes sense that our paths were going to cross because you guys are more based in the rootstock community and then expand outwards as well. And I started in the stacks community and then expanded as well to Bitcoin with an open mind, or what some people call like big tent Bitcoin. And I definitely like that. So yeah, definitely excited to chat. Been in crypto since May 2021, so it's been a little over 2 years now, and uh, this is my first foray into tech. In a previous life, I worked at a grocery store for most of my life, about 15 years. So it's been a drastic change moving into the tech space and learning all this new stuff here and going full time, etc. But yeah, happy to chat and excited to discuss all things Bitcoin or podcast or Bitcoin Frontier Fund. There's a lot that we can cover. Yeah, happy to be here.
Wow, that is very interesting. You spent 15 years in a grocery store and then you moved into tech. Can you dive a little bit into what made you make that shift and what it was like to go from one industry to another one and maybe the initial challenges that you faced? And I think is the reason why I'm asking this question in particular is because I believe there's a lot of people that are maybe in a different industry and they're trying to make the shift. So I think your perspective here would be very good for them to hear.
Definitely. So I worked at a grocery store, two different ones in my area. So I live on the West Coast in the US in Oregon, and I worked at two different chains, one for 7 years, one for 6 years. And but during that time, so that was like my full-time job, that was my stability. And through that time, I've always been pretty entrepreneurial. So I've had different kind of side hustles along the way. I had a car detailing business where I would buff the exterior of cars, making the paint shine. I had an eBay reselling business for a while. I was going to local garage sales and flipping stuff on eBay to make a buck. I had a video production company where I was shooting music videos for local hip hop artists and also doing real estate shoots, so shooting videos for real estate agents, helping them sell their properties. So I've done a bunch of things trying to escape the grocery store life, which was always the main goal, is like working for myself and doing something that I enjoy. And tried many things with different degrees of success. And then when I moved into the Bitcoin space, I actually my initial my initial catalyst was I wanted to become a developer because again, go back to career change, like I thought, okay, I've tried all these entrepreneurial things. They've worked to different degrees, but nothing has really I can't build a career on any of these. They're not solid enough to sustain myself and say a future family. So I need to be more practical. And so the idea there was to become a developer because it seems like a very secure career once you get a starter level job, you're pretty much set for life. Like coding is not going to go away even though AI is threatening some of that, it's just going to make it easier. Coding is still very much going to be in demand for the next 10, 20, 30 years at different levels of the stack. Through that, I was like, I had a thought process of, okay, I could go into Web 2 and I compete with the people who have been in here for 20 years and it might be harder to stand out. So what if I go into Web 3? And so I looked at Solidity on Ethereum. I looked at some of the Bitcoin stuff, and that's how I found Stacks because Stacks had a pretty good marketing campaign at the time, selling themselves as smart contracts on Bitcoin using their Clarity language. And so I decided if I'm gonna compete in a smaller pool where I can stand out faster, if I go into Web 3, I can do that once because there's less people in Web 3 than in Web 2. What if I subdivide that again and go into Clarity compared to Solidity, and I build on Stacks where there's less people doing it? If I'm new but decent, hopefully I can land an entry level job, and that could be like my inroad. That was the kind of catalyst that got me moving in the direction of working in tech. I spent about 4 months pretty heavily learning how to code, and then for anybody who's tried to code, it's really hard to those first few months are really hard. It's really challenging to learn some of the basic stuff, and you just constantly feel stupid most of the time. I did that for a few months, and then I started to see that there was a gap in the market, as we mentioned, where there's like crypto podcasts like Bankless, and there's Bitcoin podcasts like What Bitcoin Did, but there's not really a white space that covers the root stocks, the stacks, the even some of the lightning stuff like taproot assets, which was like not even a thing then. These would not get coverage by either outlet. It's not Bitcoin enough for Bankless, and it's not Bitcoin enough, or it's too crypto for what Bitcoin did. So there's a balance there. And so because of my video background, it was a pretty easy lift to start a podcast. And so I just set up my equipment, hopped on Zoom, which this was during COVID, so everyone's already on Zoom, and just decided to start talking to people, just following my own curiosity and seeing the need that I saw with what I thought was really interesting with stacks. And that's what kind of got the ball rolling is just doing that for 6 months straight, just talking to people at least once a week and dropping an episode. Got me noticed by Trevor, who's the managing partner at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, and they were hiring for an analyst position, which is like the lowest position you could be at a venture firm. And I applied, hit him up his DM, and he gave me a shot, and that's been the messy journey that got me from where I was in grocery to working full time in Bitcoin.
Wow, I honestly think after the way in which we work is we host these spaces, we record them, and then we cut the clips to help people digest all the information. Because I think you just gave almost like a masterclass in how to approach this new industry. Because I think that's the way to do it, and that's the way. It's very similar to the way I did it, and I don't usually tell my own story in this podcast, but like I was involved in a different industry. I was an independent artist, and during COVID, I made the shift like you into Bitcoin, and I started creating content. And to me, and this is something that I recommend to a lot of people, like what you just described, how you started with your podcast, like you saw the empty space between podcasts like what Bitcoin did, which are very financial, very macro driven, and then things like Bankless, which is um, full on with Ethereum, and now they're even talking a lot about Solana in their show, but they never talk about Rootstock, about Stacks, about all this other stuff on Bitcoin. And that is very similar to what I did. And I also started hosting podcasts and interviewing people. And I always tell people that that is the best way if you're entering a new industry, because if you do it that way, you are always getting in touch and getting connected with different people in the industry, and then opportunities just come to you. Like you just saw somebody was looking for an analyst, you applied, and people already know who you are by your content and by your work and your podcast. So it's a way of making yourself known, also meeting people constantly, doing these interviews. And to me personally, that's what allowed me to end up having the Money on Chain team ask me to host the podcast, because they really like the way I was working, and I see that it worked the same way for you. So I honestly think that we're gonna try to maybe clip that part, and I think it's a roadmap that a lot of people can adapt to their own particular skill set and their own particular. Everybody has a part of the industry that they're more interested in, but that is a very good way to go about it. And for you, it seems like it has worked really well, because again, you successfully made that transition, and now you have your podcast and you have your role in the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, which is incredible. Yeah, I hope people can learn and can apply what you did to their own life. Hopefully they can make the changes that they're seeking to do. Now, I would like to ask a little bit about, first, if you can explain what the Bitcoin Frontier Fund is for people that don't know, and then if you can tell us a bit about your role and what have you learned working for them these however long you've been working for them.
Sure. Yeah, so I work at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund full time. So the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, which is previously called Stacks Ventures, is a crypto venture firm and accelerator focused on the Bitcoin ecosystem. So we're a venture firm. We would be considered a pre-seed or seed check. So what that means is that we typically invest in the earliest rounds of a founder's journey. So we're very commonly the first check in to a company, sometimes later, but usually we're the first check in. And so what that means is that because we're so early, there's a lot of risk involved. The product is usually pretty early. They maybe have an MVP, maybe have some early users, but these are definitely not mature protocols or projects that are being spun out and ready to go. What we do at the accelerator, our bread and butter, is we invest 100K into a company. And this is a company that has typically some early product built. So it could be a DeFi thing on Stacks, or it could be something on Lightning, some ordinals thing on the L1, and typically they have some early traction, and they're ready to go faster and raise their first half a million, million, $2 million, so they can bring on a team, maybe hire some marketing people, maybe do some legal stuff. Every team needs different things depending on their team structure, and so what we do when we invest in them is they get access to our accelerator program, which is a 4-month program done all through Zoom, and we give them the basic foundations to be able to have all the kind of like checks marked to raise that money from VCs. Because raising money is a really difficult task, especially right now where the economy is very shaky, and so people are being very close to the chest with how they dole out money. Versus when I got into crypto in 2021, we're at the height of a bull market, so you were seeing all kinds of crazy things be funded with just like a white paper or like an idea. So the bar right now is pretty high. And so what that means is that raising a proper round, the standard you have to hit is also very difficult. So That's what we do at the fund, is really help founders make sure they have all the boxes checked to raise a fund. So that means like proper pitch deck, how to do proper follow up, how to find the right investors so you're not wasting your time, how to handle negotiations when they want to beat you up on, say, a valuation or something. There's all kinds of nuances here that make this really difficult. And it's really hard sometimes to just watch a YouTube video or read a blog and you get the gist, but it doesn't give you enough to really go action into that topic. And then once you try it out, it's okay. I only have more questions now. So that's what works best is we have a small team. There's 8 of us, and we do cohorts twice a year. Around 10 teams typically is in a cohort, and we just help them raise their first round. Um, and yeah, so we have a really broad thesis when it comes to Bitcoin. We started on Stacks, but since we've rebranded, we pretty much put everything under that umbrella. So a lot of focus right now is on ordinals and the L1. So we're definitely looking there heavily. But we invest in Lightning, we invest in Rootstock, we invest in Stacks, we invest in potentially RGB, which is starting to become more mature. So wherever we think there's something that could add value to the Bitcoin ecosystem and make BTC the asset or Bitcoin the network more valuable, that's what we're looking for. And so we don't really have any of the kind of maxi-ish thinking where it's if you think a token is going to add value to your product and you're doing it in a smart way, okay, like we'll help you. We can connect you with a tokenomics person. These are all just like incentive mechanisms. So if you do it very smart and deliberately, it can be a very powerful mechanism. If you do it the opposite, obviously it could be a pump and dump. So you need to be careful on this line. But a lot of investors, especially in the Bitcoin ecosystem, they have a hard line there. And so again, you have this divide where crypto investors just think that Bitcoin is this kind of like dumb rock that doesn't do anything, and Bitcoin investors don't allow enough experimentation out of their like basic line of thinking. So yeah, that's the basics of what we do as a VC fund. And my job, I started as an analyst. So your basic job as an analyst is the partners make all the decisions, and it's your job to go out and look for deals and gather up data and put it into a concise format that then they can go and make a decision on that data. So you're a filter for them. Since then, I am now the sourcing partner. I do a lot of the similar things I did before, but I have more decision-making ability at the same time. If you were seeking investment from our fund, I'm typically the first person you're gonna see whenever you apply. So you'll apply to our fund, you might send some basic info like a pitch deck, a blurb about what you're building, and then that will go into my email inbox and I'll start vetting what the idea is. So, what's your team look like? What's your idea? Do you have any traction currently? I'll have some questions for you, and then we go back and forth. So, that's my main job today is it's my job to go out and find the best founders and then vet them to see if they have potential to be a really big Bitcoin business and they can get some value from either acceleration or just investing in them directly. Yeah, a lot of my time right now is just talking to founders or keeping my ear to the ground, just like this, where I'm going into spaces, I'm going into Telegram groups, going into Discords, and just listening around Bitcoin in all the different spots and trying to find where's the most interesting stuff being built right now.
That's amazing. It seems like a very logical step from doing the podcast. We are constantly talking with people that are building to now, again, you're doing the same thing, but as well, you're connecting them with the Bitcoin Frontier Fund to actually get not only the funds needed to maybe scale their MVP, but also get their structure in place so that they can attract more investors. That I think is extremely super valuable for the space. And I really the approach that the BTC Frontier Fund has of being, or at least paying attention to the entire of the Bitcoin ecosystem, because most companies and most projects they're focused on their own small island in the Bitcoin universe, and having things like the BTC Frontier Fund that are all encompassing I think that is something that is very needed in the space so that we can start to build bridges between the communities. That is something that I am personally very involved with at the moment. I'm trying to help, for example, the rootstock community get to know more about the stacks community and with the Lightning community, which usually they don't talk to each other, and I think that's such a waste opportunity. Now you briefly touched on the aspect of tokenomics, and that's something that, again, like you said, many of the Bitcoin maxis are, as soon as they hear that there's a token, they tune out, and I think that's a shame. We recently did an entire conversation with Mati Tokenomics, who wrote an entire book about the subject. The book is available for free, so anyone just search on Twitter for his handle is at Mati with double T Tokenomics, and on his profile you can find the book, and it's a really great guide that walks through exploring all the different projects that had tokens and they didn't work, and he explains why they didn't work, and then he presents like a way of how a builder should think about of if they're going to add a token. First of all, what's the reason for having the token? What's the utility the token is going to have? And then even he talks about at what stage of the project development it makes sense to have a token, right? Because a lot of we see a lot of projects that, like you said before, with the whole ICO thing, like people were getting funded just by having a token and a white paper, and that clearly didn't work. We saw a lot of pumps and dumps, or a lot of projects that were not fully developed, and people were jumping in just because they had their own token.
Yeah, on
Yeah.
that topic, because we work with Maddie closely at the fund. Maddie's amazing, and yeah, it's super interesting because I get the maxi perspective of the concerns of tokens. I think that right now we're seeing I try and watch the entire ecosystem, and this divide between Ethereum and Solana right now is super interesting for a bunch of reasons. But I think one of the most important is that Ethereum probably shot itself in the foot when it tried to be the settlement layer for all these L2s, which is probably good. That's the way to go. But they were also trying to be ultrasound money. So they were claiming they were being money. And so once you bring that into the lexicon, um, you know, you there's this idea that you move as a token or money, you move from store of value to medium of exchange to unit of account. And so the important thing there is that you need to get them in a process. If you try and jump ahead one, it breaks a different one. So if you go too fast to medium of exchange, you haven't properly set up store of value for it to absolutely stick. And I think ETH did it that way, which is that it's been used a lot as a medium of exchange for NFTs, for example, or like being able to swap across stablecoin assets. But it's not clear that it's a store of value. And their idea that we're ultrasound money because we're deflationary, um, it's allowing Bitcoin is better at that on the money side, and Solana is better at the transaction execution layer side. So it's not clear where Ethereum sits now, as far as they're doing both kind of poorly, I would say. And so on the tokenomics piece, like what the maxis get right is that money should be things shouldn't really try to compete with Bitcoin at the money layer like that if it's a volatile asset. It should be probably BTC and stablecoins, and then incentive optimized protocol tokens that are purpose driven, like Solana, for example. If Solana starts trying to be money as well, I think that gets really messy. And I get what they're saying. They throw the baby out with the bathwater by not allowing any other token to be add incentives to people, but I think that's gonna break, and I think it's already breaking, mainly because of ordinals, to be honest. Because once we got inscriptions and BRC20s on the L1, there was like a what 4-week period where everyone was up in arms, and we were talking about censoring nodes, and these transactions aren't valid, and you're graffitiing my money, all these things. And after 4 to 6 weeks, finally the kinda like code is law narrative came to be, and it's if Bitcoin accepts it, it's valid. And now we're seeing like miner fees are skyrocketing. We have the second time ever where the block subsidy has been replaced by fees, which is now what we can start to see what a security model looks like long term. It looks something like this, where you have economically dense transactions for payments, and you have degen culture, and you have people using it for storage. The future of Bitcoin is something like that. It's an amalgam of all these different use cases. I do believe that most are going to be economic payments, but is that going to make up all of it? Almost certainly not. And with BRC20s, I might not like the way the standard is written technically, but is it helping miners and starting to change the narrative that some kind of other token can exist on Bitcoin and be value add? I think for sure it's made that abundantly clear. And so how that plays out over time over the next few years will be really interesting. But yeah, I do think that the VCs, for example, which is where I spend most of my time, that stay true to that narrative are going to miss out on a lot of interesting founders and ideas that are going to add a lot of value to Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. It seems since the inception of ordinals, it has been a dramatic change in the conversations that we're having in the space, and it has put, like you said, it has put the maxi narrative, at least, in a, it's not as strong as it used to be, because now that you have all this other stuff on the Bitcoin main chain even, and there's no real way to stop it. That's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin, is if you're paying the fees, nobody can stop you, and that's the whole point of the protocol. So it is exciting to see a new wave of innovation coming. A new is, for me at least, in that I'm involved in the hosting all these spaces and podcasts. It's good to see that we are expanding the topics that we can discuss on Bitcoin, and we are attracting a lot of new builders and a lot of new use cases. We're trying to get some people that are actively building interesting things in Ordinal. We're talking with the guys from Liquidium, which are building an interesting platform to take loans against your ordinals, which I didn't even thought it was possible until a few days ago. So it's so interesting. Every day there is something new to see. There is something new to learn. I've been talking with, there's a new marketplace that's going to launch very soon called Bionic, and I am trying to create a collection, an ordinal collection, that to incentivize people to join these spaces more often, so that they can get it like badges or like something to reward our listeners. And my idea is to have every episode we have someone like you coming here to tell us what they are building, what they are thinking about in the space. So I want to create a collection with all these Bitcoin builders, so that we can inscribe them and then they can be in the blockchain forever. So it's going to be like almost like a gallery of different Bitcoin builders. That's how we're trying to do. Just try to experiment and see what we can use this technology to do.
I love the
So
idea. I got a couple quick thoughts because you mentioned building on Bitcoin was like inaccessible for a while there, and Ordinals changed that. And I think that's big, which is like when I first got here in 2021, building on Bitcoin, like in the on the L1, felt it felt super inaccessible, almost elitist is what I would say it felt like, because there was like core developers and like knowing Bitcoin script just felt really heavy. And so a lot of people moved to Stacks or Rootstock or these other chains, partially because they're easier to build on and they're done in JavaScript or some other somewhat easier to understand language. It was really hard to see especially a newbie to do something active on the L1 and be productive. It wasn't something you had in your mind that you could do. And that really broke, I think, with ordinals. And what's really interesting is that what you saw pretty quickly is that a lot of the teams that were on the periphery, so these are Stacks teams, these are ICP teams, these are BSV teams, to be honest, they quickly pivoted from building on the chains they were building up a level on, and they came down to the L1 really quickly within 4 to 6 weeks. We saw quite a few teams from across those ecosystems build marketplaces and subscription services, and they've stayed there ever since. And this idea of there's been like latent developer and engineering talent pushed to the outside for too long, and ordinals gave them like one umbrella to plant their flag on and build under one common purpose, I think is super, super powerful because up until that point, the maxi line of no tokens here, no art here, we're building money was like super clean. And so you couldn't really push back too much against them. They just pushed you up to liquid or rootstock or stacks, etc. So it's really great to see that people are starting to come down. Because I do think as the L1 gets more and more expensive over time for long periods of time, you're going to see the L2s become more practical just because they make sense. Move your ordinals to Bionic on ICP, or move your stablecoin to a Taproot channel on Taproot assets, for example, or something on Liquid. And with the companies you said, Liquidium and Bionic, like those are two perfect examples. Liquidium started on Stacks; they were doing a Stacks lending protocol, and then they moved down to ordinals and using DLCs, which is a latent technology that's been around since 2021, but no one's really using it. They found a way to use DLCs as like the mechanism to handle the lending mechanism of this piece. So they use PSBTs, which is like how people trade nowadays, and they put that in a DLC that then handles, and there's an oracle in that piece that unlocks the lending piece. So a stats team comes down, leverages DLCs and L1 technology, and makes ordinals more productive. The same with Bionic, where it's like they're allowing you to on ICP, which is I haven't done a deep dive. I don't know that much about it, but they allow you to bridge over. They have a pretty decent peg in, peg out solution, though it's partially trusted. But you can bridge in your ordinal, and then once it's on ICP, you get all the transaction time benefits of using their marketplace. And so this kind of like changing landscape of people coming down to the L1 and then back up to their respective ecosystems. I think this kind of like bi-directional thing is super good for Bitcoin, and I'm curious to see how it plays out over the coming months and years.
Yeah. We open the spaces saying that there is an unprecedented level of innovation and experimentation happening on Bitcoin. And yeah, all that you just said, it's a clear example of that. And like when you started, you were saying that a lot of the projects that were developing on the L2s now are finding a way to go into the L1. And I think that is leading some people to the I don't think it's an accurate belief that this is bearish for layer twos, because I do think that each layer two is particularly optimized for certain use cases. For example, in the case of Rootstock, we see that financial tools are pretty much what is dominating the Rootstock blockchain, because it provides a really good ecosystem for those kinds of tools. It's like very secure, and it's focused a lot on the emerging markets like Latin America and Africa. Rootstock itself got started in Argentina. The Money on Chain team, which is where we're hosting these spaces now, they got started in Argentina as well, trying to provide solutions for people that have local currencies that are just depreciating extremely quickly. And things like stacks, I see a lot of things like Web3, NFT communities, a lot of that stuff happening there. Yeah, I like that a lot of projects are going back to the L1 to build, but that doesn't mean that the L2s are losing their relevance. And even you said it very well that as we develop more things in the L1, the fees are going to increase. We are seeing it right now. At the moment, I think we have pretty high fees. And that only makes the case for L2s that much more important. What I am really excited about is this ability that we're starting to see, like with Bionic, that you can bridge your L1 asset into the L2, and then you can do other stuff with it. That is fascinating, because we're starting to see more interaction and more collaboration between all the different layers and the ecosystem. And that, I believe, that's what we need the most at the moment. And I wanted to ask you, because you said that the BTC Frontier Fund is very focused on ordinals at the moment, and we talk about Liquidium. Um, and I just wanted to ask if there's any other project or any other thing in the ordinal space that you're excited about, or you want to share some of that stuff with us?
Um, let's see. We got a lot of applications doing a lot of different things. So we saw some creator tools that are pretty interesting. Right now, for example, the it's still pretty hard to work with recursion, for example. Recursion is this really cool idea that once you store a file on as an ordinal or as an inscription, you can then pull it back and you can pull different pieces back and you can say build a website this way or do an NFT collection where you inscribe 10 different hats, but then if you want to do a 10,000 piece collection, you can just pull those different hats as as recursive inscriptions. And so it's much more data efficient to do it that way. So I think there's a lot you can do with recursion that is still at the early stages. And art is one example of that, where if you add 500 traits to as individual traits and upload them, piecing them back together is still super messy. Like you're using HTML code and you're layering them using the right ordering, and then when you pull that recursive inscription on the browser, it's going to just read that HTML code like it would any other website. And so the tools to make that clean and effortless, almost like a Canva style interface, doesn't exist. So people doing stuff to make it easier for creators to build better art is super interesting. DeFi is always interesting. So we've seen some like BRC20 stuff. We'll see what Casey does with runes. That's a big TBD. Rare Sats. I see Corey in the audience. He's doing something at Magisat, but Rare Sats is a big narrative right now where one Satoshi no longer equals one Satoshi. And so that one's interesting. What else for the ordinal space? I think multi-sig is one. So I see Mike Overlord down below as well. They're doing something really interesting with a Signa, where they're making it easier to secure your assets in a multi-sig across any Bitcoin layer. So not just the L1, but they currently support stacks. I saw, and I've heard rumors they might do something like Rootstock, and they maybe go liquid eventually. There's all kinds of ways. I think that's a pretty big narrative. Is you're going to see a lot of applications go, we'll call it cross-chain, but they keep it in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So you're not going from BTC to ETH, you're going from BTC to Rootstock, and from Rootstock to Stacks, and from Stacks to whatever other chains become culturally relevant, if you will. I think that's gonna be a really big push. I'm really bullish on wallets that do that in a good fashion. The wallets that support the most important chains easily and effectively are definitely going to win, and there's none that have it all figured out yet. But there's not a single wallet currently that supports both L1, Ordinals, and Lightning. So there's no wallet that I could do my payments on Lightning, my L1 transactions, and my collectible stuff in one wallet. It just doesn't exist yet. So there's gaps in the market there. So I'm really bullish on that narrative. I don't know what bridging looks like long term. It's a big topic that people have a lot of like issues with trust assumptions on. You want to be careful with that. But I think the idea of cross chain that we were like sold a year and a half ago, where you're going to see liquidity from ETH flow to Solana and BTC effortlessly, I see no reason why that's going to be the case. Mainly because if I bridge Bitcoin over to ETH, it doesn't do anything unless there's applications that support it. And so there's this kind of like chicken and egg problem of once the asset's there, the user wants to have applications to put it in, and the application developer wants to have proper traction and like assets spread over before they support it. And since neither are going first, you see this with Wrap BTC. Like there's a ton of Wrap BTC on Ethereum, but there's only 5 applications in the entire ecosystem to even use your Wrap BTC. So most people are just holding it to get the price exposure to Bitcoin. They're not doing a bunch of DeFi stuff over there on Ethereum with their Bitcoin, but they are on Bitcoin. They're doing it on Rootstock. They're doing it on Liquid. They're doing it on Stacks in some fashion. So I think the idea of cross chain is going to come to one umbrella. So I think teams that do that well ordinals are currently on the L1, but what does a really good experience look like when you can bridge an ordinal to stacks and vice versa? So yeah, bullish on those lines getting more blurred and really making it easy for the user to not feel it. Fees are going to be an issue because moving off the L1 is going to always be expensive, I think. But yeah, if you can be really clever with your design on making that less felt by the end user, and they just can effortlessly move their BTC wherever it's most productive, that's like the future that I'm looking for, and like looking at the ecosystem of who's the people building that out, where's the opportunities. Yeah,
Wow, that's a lot of really fascinating things. I'm glad to see that we have Quarry and Overlord in the audience. So I just send you guys a follow, and I would love to know more about your projects. Hopefully, we can maybe have you on some spaces or something like that. The thing that you mentioned about that there is no wallet that connects to the entire of the Bitcoin ecosystem, that is something that I hope it gets fixed soon. Our next guest for the spaces next week is going to be the Xverse team, and they're building a pretty good wallet, a very good UI. But like you said, it doesn't take advantage of the entire Bitcoin space. Like you cannot use it with rootstock, which is unfortunate. Hopefully, in the future, I know that these things take time to develop. It's not as easy. If it was easy, we would already have that wallet that doesn't exist. So we have a question from the audience, and I wanted to remind the audience that they can ask any question they want in the chat, or they can request a mic if they want to ask it themselves. But we have from Travis Trades, who's a member from the Sovereign community, one of the biggest DeFi protocols on Bitcoin, on Rootstock in particular, but also it's one of the biggest in general. And he's asking if you think that the high transactions of the L1 is gonna incentivize more people to build on the L2. I think we touched on this briefly, but if you want to give a direct answer, that would be great.
definitely. Yeah, thanks for the question, Travis. I follow him. I've seen some of his videos. Good dude. I think it's it's a contentious topic. I'm wrestling with. So I think that eventually the L1s are going to push things to the L2. The problem though is that if you would have asked me a year and a half ago if Stacks is going to be the one, I would have said duh. And we've seen so many examples of, say, there's some financial crisis globally, and we're like, this is what Bitcoin is made for. Everyone's going to jump into store value, price is going to pump, and then we'll all be buying coffee on Lightning and etc. And I think that these things take way longer than we expect. And when it comes to building on the L2s, I'm having a really hard time suggesting like where a dev should go because none of the L2s, if you're being really honest, have tremendous traction. Rootstock has pretty good TVL when it comes to DeFi, but outside of Sovereign and money on chain, there's not much going on over there. On Stacks, they have a decent NFT community, and their DeFi, they have some great applications, but they're mostly an altcoin. You can't really peg in BTC there, so that doesn't feel like a Bitcoin chain yet. So SBTC should change that, but we'll see. Liquid's going for this really like they want to be like the securities issuance platform. So if you're doing a proper stable coin through USDT or USDC or some regulated thing, they want to be the like issuance layer for that. And they have like private transactions and stuff. And Liquid gets made fun of a lot, but it looks like Arc is going to be the first place where we're going to see a proof of concept of Arc, which is the scaling solution will have Liquid as its kind of base layer because they have covenants. The next proposed upgrade to Bitcoin is already live in some form or another on Liquid. So if Arc builds it there, once it comes to L1, they can bring it down to L1 pretty easily. And so if you're using something using covenants and you want to like be at the bleeding edge there, I actually might suggest Liquid. Now, is there users for you? Doesn't look like it. Like their block explorer has almost no transactions all day long. So there's not much going on over there. If you have a 1 to 2 year time horizon and you're building something that when the time is right, you want to move quickly and support a covenant based product on the L1, Liquid might be your place. As far as where to build, I don't know. It's really hard. I think you need to do your research, and I just gave a broad picture, and then you have to make a. You are at some level right now making. You're going to take a step of faith on that L getting oversized traction, because from my view, trying to remain objective, I see no reason why any of the above couldn't win, if I'm being totally honest. Stacks has good marketing, Stacks has a bunch of developers, they have a bunch of applications, but it has a token, and people hate tokens. A good subset don't like tokens. Rootstock, half of Bitcoin is merge mining it, so that's pretty damn secure. It's EVM based, so there's a ton of developer tooling. But again, like people just it's used, but not a lot. So in the same way that I don't understand why degens are buying BRC20 tokens like crazy, I don't know what's going to make an L2 pop culturally. As a developer, right now I'm recommending if you can build on the L1. As a second question, I typically point to Lightning because there's just a lot. Of there's still a lot of unexplored ground there and investor interest there, so you can secure some funding. And then after that, I would just look at the landscape. If you want to DM me, and make a concerted effort on choosing one ecosystem. And it's a very personal question. Is it rootstock? Is it liquid? Is it Stacks? Is it ICP? Is it Interlay? There's a myriad of chains that are trying to be a Bitcoin sidechain. And you should look at your risk tolerance and what you're trying to build and say, I think I have the best chance here, and just start building. But if you can build on L1, it's the place to be right now by a long shot. But again, the problem is that because it's so limited, there's just way more things you can't build there that you can somewhere else. It depends what you're building and what your objective is.
Wow, that was a very good general overview of almost the entire Bitcoin space. So thank you so much, Jacob. I don't think there's many people that have such a broad knowledge of this space, honestly. I think most people are just too focused on one thing. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to speak to you. And I think what you're describing, it seems to me like a very complicated jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces are not yet fitting together, but you can start to see the picture that we're trying to build together. So I think that, yeah, I took a lot of notes while you were talking, and I found it extremely interesting. Now we have a speaker, is a Hero Gamer, who's very involved with the Stacks community. Hero, I am happy to have you back in our spaces. I will apologize that we did a previous episode with Hero, and unfortunately it didn't get recorded. So I am happy to have you here again, and this time we are recording. So you'll definitely, yeah, you just be a part of our roster of guests.
Hey guys, nice to hear the conversation. Actually, this is probably my favorite type of conversation where we talk about all the different ecosystems and I really appreciate Jake's perspective. And in case you didn't see the comment, CB Spears called Jake one of the top 10 people to follow in the Bitcoin space. So Jake really has the knowledge. And what I like about Jake is like Jake, and I think I try to do the same. Although we came from Stacks, but we try to be as objective as possible. And that's one of the biggest thing I like about Jake is, yeah, we came from similar places, but yeah, we all try to help the ecosystem grow, not just trying to say, oh, my favorite is Stacks or something like that. But yeah, so I just want to mention that. And maybe if I can ask Jake a question. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. You're seeing a lot of into the investment side, the VC side. How much do you think like the growth of an ecosystem related to how much funding there are in each of the ecosystem? Yeah, do you think it's a very positive correlation, direct correlation, or do you think it's not correlated? And also, which ecosystem roughly has the most funding and which one has, or maybe the top ones? Or Yeah, would you be able to give us a little bit overview?
Yeah, let me think. Can you repeat part of the question? I actually blanking even though I had some thoughts.
Yeah, how much correlation do you think there is to the size or the growth of the ecosystem from its
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
availability of funds? Is it very correlated or is it not? And the second
I
question was which ones has the biggest funding, which ones has less?
got it. Great question. Great question. Yeah, I think it matters more than people give it credit for. And there's a few reasons why. One is, and this is funny, but most Web3 projects and most protocols don't make that much money. If you look on Ethereum, there's only a few that make the vast amount of the revenue. And the issue you have there is that if you're a developer and you have this great idea, Stacks is a good example. Stacks, I got in 2021, and I met quite a few founders during that bull run era. And because Stacks hasn't found product market fit in the broader context, a lot of people got bled dry and they can't sustain because they don't make enough money to keep building. And having a grants program like Stacks does, or I saw Rootstock just launched theirs, which is fantastic. These allow builders to, like, money is a leveraging tool, and it allows you to focus your energy on something that you wouldn't otherwise. And it's funny. I talked to some founder like a year ago, and he was like, "I have 5 ideas I could build, and if my third idea is fundable by a grant that get 25K to build it, my third option becomes number one. Even though number one might technically be like the thing I'm most interested in, number three is still pretty cool, and I can sustain myself with that kind of like bootstrapping money." And so for the ecosystems that don't have a ton of investor interest, those developers have a way harder time raising money. And so by extension, they have to bootstrap longer, and that just becomes a conviction bet. Like, how long will you build something without being paid and waiting for users to come? It's a really hard question. And so, like, Liquid raises a ton of money and they could support some people. Rootstock has their grants program, like $2.5 million or something. That's great, but they also have kind of a bootstrapping issue. It's also like the gift and the curse to Stacks is that it has a token which gives them kind of a black eye to some people, but it's allowed them to bootstrap an absolute ton of developers to build stuff that wouldn't otherwise be built. And so whether you think that breaks incentives irreversibly, that's a long discussion. But the idea that investors like investors do allow people to build unsustainably for some amount of time and hope they find product market fit. And if you have to do that alone and just work your side job, or you're doing Instacart or something on the side and then you're trying to code at night, like, it's hard to balance those things. And so investors allow you to certain ideas a chance to blossom that otherwise wouldn't. So I think that's really important. And then your second question was like, where's there the most interest? By far, it's the L1 right now. Like, it's not even close. It used to be like a year ago. It was like Lightning was like the darling, and then L1 was pretty interesting. And then you had some investors who have more like higher conviction bets on a side chain, but that's like their personal thesis. Right now, it's flipped. So L1 and ordinals are probably like 5 to 1 or 10 to 1 on interest compared to Lightning. And then Lightning is a clear second. And then everything past that is long tail. And Stacks is standing out with investors. I think people are starting to watch other chains too. Like, I've heard a little bit from Rootstock as far as people showing interest. And then one caveat here is that a lot of investors really like tokens. And we have a middle thesis. So we don't do token only deals because we don't think that aligns the incentives well enough for both parties. Because if the VC can just dump on you in 2 years, are they really your partner for the long term? I don't know. So we like deals that are both like an equity and maybe there's a token you're gonna launch. But yeah, so if you're on a chain that allows you to sell an investor tokens, you can also raise off of that, which makes some of these L2 plays slightly more enticing if you structure it because you're giving more incentive to the investors. But yeah, just to bring it back, the L1 is by far all the focus right now, and really it's driven by ordinals. And then second is Lightning, and then all the kind of L2s are at that point you're probably selling your team more than the chain. You have to convince the investor why this chain is the right one to build on, but you're going to sell your idea or you as a team compared to Rootstock will be the next L2 to pop because investors are going to see that as mostly an assumption and a pretty high risk bet.
Thank you, Jacob. Again, that was a very detailed and complete answer, and yeah, I'm learning a lot from this talk. Yeah, I just want to say that you mentioned the Rootstock grant program is 2.5 million, and it is still open. Some people, I think, already got their initial funds, but there's still room. If there's any builders in the audience that are interested, you can just go to rootstock.io, and as soon as you enter in the main page, you can see a banner that will direct you to the place where you can apply. And we have another speaker. We have Henry here, who's also a Rootstock ambassador. So, Henry, do you have a question for Jacob?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Jacob, for your time on the space. So, I think I got a lot of questions, but I just want to take it bit by bit. And so, my first question is: we're talking about building on Bitcoin, what's actually been built on Bitcoin, and actually the future. So far, so good. As per regions like as per Africa, Asia, Europe, America, South America. What's your thought on the impact of what's actually being built right now on Bitcoin? Does it really have much impact in terms of these regions? Are we really seeing the impact of what's actually been built in terms of usability? What's your say on how many people are really using what's actually being built on Bitcoin? So that's like my first question. So once you're done with that, I'm going to bring up the second question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the main answer is I'm not sure, mainly because I don't have a good understanding of those markets. And so I don't want to talk things I don't know super well. I will say that it seems like BTC, the asset, is slightly less valuable down there. We see examples like El Salvador and stuff where they're doing Lightning, and that's cool. But more broadly, it doesn't. It seems like the volatility of Bitcoin is a pretty big barrier for a lot of people in those areas. And so the chains that are unfortunately getting the most traction are the crypto chains like Tron, and there's a couple others that are moving stable coins in big numbers. So because the fees are lower, you can move stable coins using some of these networks. So that's a big opportunity for someone to figure that out. And it's where, say, Taproot and Taproot Assets is trying to solve, where if you can make it easier to go from Bitcoin to a stable coin over Lightning, would that be a big value add? I think so. But yeah, more broadly, like I've seen some startups doing really interesting stuff, like Azteco is one, where they allow you to go into a local location and use this device. It's like a little point of sale system basically, and you can convert your local currency dollars into this piece of paper. It's an Azteco voucher, and that voucher lets you either buy or sell Bitcoin using this simple device. So I've heard that has pretty good traction, so that's pretty interesting. But yeah, more broadly, I'm not sure. I don't understand these markets. I got to do a lot more research.
Perfect. Henry, before you continue with your questions, I just want to give some context to the audience. Henry is based in Nigeria. I was born in Argentina, so I can 100% agree with you, Jacob, that in emerging markets, and I'm sure Henry would also agree, people want stablecoins more than they want Bitcoin, even though it's hard for Bitcoin maxis to accept. And that's why the money on chain protocol, which got started in Argentina, focuses on creating a way that people can mint Bitcoins that are backed with Bitcoin, something that Sovereign as well is trying to do with their sovereign dollar. I think that is for emerging markets, that is the killer app is stablecoins that are backed with Bitcoin. And I know, Hero, you're also at Colombia in the moment, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm sure you also have an interesting perspective of what's happening over there. Yeah, just that
People
context.
use pesos here. I don't see much people using dollars here. Interesting. I think it's probably more stable than other countries.
All right, interesting. I haven't been in Colombia in like more than a decade, so it's good to have perspective from boots on the ground. Now, Henry, I'll let you continue with your questions.
All right, thank you for that answer. Okay, based on building, since today we're talking a lot about building, and so just this question: have you actually seen some level of frictions in what's actually been built on Bitcoin? Are there frictions? Because I was actually chatting with someone yesterday, and then someone was pointing out some frictions on Rootstock, and this is the problem with Rootstock, this is the problem with Rootstock, and I was like, okay, you're actually right, but stuff like that. So do you really see frictions on what is actually being built on Bitcoin? Are there frictions, stuff like kind of hinder people from really being able to use this product well? And also talking about builders. So are there things that you've actually spotted out that can help builders actually build better projects? What kind of advice are you going to give to builders that are actually building for the future on Bitcoin? How should they build? What should they take in mind? What should they actually use as a pathfinder, or something that they can actually use to build? What they should build on, how they should build, and so that we can actually build for the future, because I believe what we are building for Bitcoin on Bitcoin is actually very important for the world and the finances globally.
Totally. Yeah, I think so. Your question is around from like a user perspective and from a dev perspective. I think from the user perspective, there's massive frictions. And I don't see this talked about quite enough, which is if you're sending a payment on Bitcoin, the block times are already a blocker. Like people are compared to the alternative, people are used to Cash App or something like that, where it's like in the same time I'm with you face to face, I can type in your username, send you money, and you got at least confirmation. It's not finalized. That's a whole separate topic, but like you get some feeling of assurance that money's in your account and the lunch you are getting paid back for is done. Bitcoin is not that. You get some random block explorer transaction link and it has unconfirmed or confirmed and it says it's got 7 confirmations or something. So I think to the average user, that UX is still pretty ugly. The second one is seed phrases. Seed phrases are great to be able to secure your private key in a way that's easier to hold on to, but I don't really think my mom wants to. Having her have to understand that is a friction point for the end user, and that compounds when you start talking about going to different chains, like going from the L1 to rootstock to stacks to lightning. Can I use the same seed phrase? Probably not. So you now have to hold multiple seed phrases in different ecosystems and make sure that you have them backed up properly. They're not going to get lost, etc. So there's a lot of friction on the user perspective. And I look at this not within a Bitcoin context. I look at this from just a purely what's the ideal experience. If you're using Solana or using Cash App, and you can just get perfect finality immediately, that's the gold standard. And you maybe use some kind of decentralized ID. You don't have to send it to an address, you send it to a name, and it just feels easier. So I know, okay, I'm sending this to Henry, and I'm gonna send him $10 on blah blah blah. There's a lot of complexity still on Bitcoin, and that's before we even talked about fees. Which is, I sent $250 this morning to someone for something I bought, and it costed me 11% in fees to send that transaction. It was like $26 or something. That's another big friction point, which is if you have all your BTC on the L1 and then you want to move to a different chain, depending on what's going on in the market, you have either massive pain or you get lucky. It just depends. And it depends on UTXO consolidation. There's tons of layers here that the end user, if we're trying to onboard the masses, should not have to think about. So from a user perspective, it works well enough for a crypto native person. We're not even close to getting started for the average person, is my personal view. There's a lot of work being done to make that easier. I've seen 2 wallets in the past year that have different schemes to do away with the seed phrase, and they use different mechanisms to make those secure. So that's really interesting. And then from the dev perspective, I'm not super techy, so I don't have a ton to add here. I obviously building if you're coming from Web 2 or even from Ethereum, there's way less documentation on Bitcoin, like by a long shot. There's way less tutorials. There's way less people here, although that's changing. And so there's just less people to rub shoulders with and get some of your questions answered. If you're trying to build something, it's a little harder here to figure out some edge cases and not just bang your head against the wall for like days on end. And then second, just because the L1 is so limited, you really can't build that much on the L1. Depending what you want to build, you have to move up a layer, which brings up the other question we talked about earlier of ecosystem adoption. If you move up to rootstock or stacks or some other layer and you build it technically, you might just be building in an echo chamber because there's only 1,000 users who are going to use whatever that thing you built is. I think all that's changing. I think the interest in L1 is super bullish for not just the L1 but the L2s. But is it difficult to be a developer in Bitcoin? For sure. It's hard, but it's getting easier. And it's getting easier by the day, but it's still very difficult.
All right, that was a great answer, Jacob. We have Travis Straits, who's wanting to ask you a question. Now, Travis, thank you for joining. Before I give you the mic to answer your question, I just want to add my 2 cents about connecting what you just described, Jacob, about the friction for users and what we were talking before in emerging markets. One of the frictions that I find constantly is, like we said, people from emerging markets wanting the stablecoin, not so much Bitcoin. And then what they do as soon as they enter Rootstock is they mint all their Bitcoin into stablecoins. And then they realize, oh, I don't have any Bitcoin to pay the fees. So I have all these stablecoins and I can't move them. That is one thing that if we don't solve that problem, that's going to be massive friction for adoption of the general public. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. And then just say that, Jacob, I know we agreed for 1 hour conversation and we're already over it. So selfishly, I don't want this to end because I'm learning so much. So just let us know if you have time to continue, or if you have to go, let us know, and it's all good. We can always arrange another spaces later.
I'll go for 5 more minutes, then I'm gonna go hit the gym. So yeah, this has been great. But let's do a couple more questions and then we can jump off.
All right, perfect. Travis, thank you again for joining us, and yeah, you have the mic.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. It's weird. This is my first space I've ever actually spoken at. I think just looking at what we've seen with ETH and this layer 2 and just the cost of ETH, we've seen that it's become almost unusable with all the building and stuff that happened on it. And I think that we should we should expect the same thing to happen with Bitcoin. And so in that sense, I think it's really good that ETH kind of paved the way for us, not only for the innovation, but also understanding like the flaws that come with building on the L1. And so I just think of, based on my question earlier, is there really a need to build on the L1? Because over time, as more and more DeFi is built on Bitcoin, everything's going to become more and more expensive. Even with L2s being built on Bitcoin, at the end of it, it's going to be, on the L1. So it's still going to raise the cost and transaction fees. And so I feel like we're in this situation where if people do decide to build on L1, which is very enticing because it sounds like a very big deal and everyone wants to be able to do that. I almost see that as like digging their own hole or their own grave, just because the transaction fees over time are just going to naturally increase. I don't see those going down. And so I guess I just don't really see a reason or an incentive really to be building on the L1.
I think it makes sense logically. I think the issue here though is there's something about the L1 that people just gravitate towards. Because even if you look at Ethereum, it's had periods of extreme fees, and even right now it's like decently high fees, most of the DeFi, TVL, is still on the L1, which at some level doesn't make sense. Because why would you not just move up to Polygon or Arbitrum? Like, I don't understand. I just know the names. I don't know what they do. But like, why would you not move up a chain and transact for way cheaper with faster finality? There's something about the L1 that's inherently not centralizing, but it attracts users and liquidity because it's the center of gravity. And there's something about if you over optimize too early, you end up it's what the L2s have done, which is that they tried to front run adoption of Bitcoin will be expensive eventually, so we're going to build it now. and you could save yourself a few percentage points in fees. But when Bitcoin was super cheap to move money, it was like, yeah, you could go to Lightning and spend like a fraction of a penny, but it only costs you 87 cents to send your transaction on Bitcoin. So that's not a 10x improvement when you're sending $1,000 because it's still a fraction of your transaction. Although I agree with you that logically it makes sense, and it's one of the reasons why I got into stacks was I had that same thesis. The market has humbled me of there's something about the L1 that's just sticky for some reason. Do I think DeFi is going to be on the L1 in some massive way? Probably not. And there's certain things you just shouldn't do on the L1, like order books require faster transaction times to be able to close and open positions. So a 10-minute block time is just, it doesn't make sense. So that has to be on the L2. But yeah, it's something that it boggles my mind. It doesn't quite make sense. But I have to just admit, if I look at ETH as a comparison, people seem to be okay with the fees as long as it doesn't get really crazy for too long. And for the most part, if you're trading on ETH and you're trading NFTs and it's $1,000 and it costs you $10, they seem to be okay with that trade-off compared to going to Polygon because there's just a lack of liquidity on the other L2s. So the risk of the L2 of fragmentation is greater than the pro of having to pay 4% more on the L1. So we'll see how it plays out. Bitcoin is definitely different though, because Bitcoin doesn't care about sidechains at like a technical level. The peg in process is like super important here, and it hasn't been solved yet in any like real way. Everyone's trying different models of like trust assumptions to make it good enough. But Lightning is the current gold standard, and it's still not like perfect to be able to move your Bitcoin to Lightning and be like 1000% sure that there's no chance it gets lost. Every other sidechain has worse assumptions than that when it comes to trust. Yeah, when it comes to moving up a chain and settling back down on a chain, the L1, L2 on Bitcoin, there's a lot that goes into it. It's really tricky. But as far as L1 and L2 fees, I'm with you, but I think the market's going to tell me we're wrong, and it's going to keep being really concentrated on the L1 as like home base.
Great answer, Jacob. I think that you touch on very important things. This center of gravity of the L1, the risk of fragmentation of the L2s. If we can't solve this problem of interoperability and easily go through one chain to the other, the end goal would be to not even know which chain you're using, and that's all abstracted away in the back end. That would be the ideal, I think. But it seems like we are far away from that. So we're reaching the end. I don't know, Travis, if you have a follow-up question or...
Can I ask you guys a question? Because like you guys are in the rootstock community. What are you guys most excited about right now? Like Money on Chain and Sovereign are doing cool stuff. Is there anything cool going on amongst those two projects, or what's the most exciting in rootstock right now?
That is a great question. So I'll answer from the Money on Chain side, and I'll let Travis speak from Sovereign. I think and this is going to sound very paradoxical, but the thing that excites me most about Money on Chain, and I think this is one of the things that separates Money on Chain from, to my knowledge, every other DeFi protocol in every other chain, which is that the community, the Money on Chain community, decided that the protocol works as it is, and even though there is low liquidity and low users in the rootstock blockchain, it was designed to work even in those conditions. So we're pretty much done. The protocol has no longer a roadmap. We decided the thing works, so let's not mess with it, right? If something works and you try to change it, there's more chances that you're going to mess it up, that you're going to improve it. So Money on Chain is a very simple protocol. You can only mint and redeem stablecoins or the BPRO token, which is a way of adding liquidity and earning. And it has been working flawlessly since its inception in 2019. And that's what really excites me about Money on Chain, is that it's not a promise of something that's going to work at some stage in the future. It's something that works now. And because it works, we are no longer going to mess with it. And now the Money on Chain team is busy creating a different protocol that's going to use the Money on Chain assets and it's going to reward the money on chain community. So the people that hold the mock token will receive an airdrop of the new protocol. And I really like this way of building, where it's like you put yourself a task of building one good thing that works, and you build it out, and then you ossify it, and then you just build another thing that leverages what you already built, and you can expand that way in little in steps, but making sure that everything it works, it's ossified, and you don't have to continually try to create a new use case or continually trying to attract new users, because we see the same problem that you described, that there's going to be probably for the next few years, we're going to be in an environment of low liquidity and low users. So the tools that we build need to have that assumption. So I know it's a very different answer to what most people expected, but that is the thing that I really like more people to know about, that money on chain is, unless the community votes for a change, we consider it to be a finished protocol. And I don't think there's any DeFi protocol out there that can say that. So that's from money on chain. Now, Travis, I'll let you speak about Sovereign, which I know you have a lot of knowledge about.
Oh, yeah. I think overall, I'm just excited about RSK just because of they're EVM compatible. I know Stacks just recently they're working on their smart contracting language so that they'd also be compatible with the EVM. But I think that just we're seeing just now this excitement with Bitcoin DeFi. And so people are starting to look around and see what's already been established. And there's also these projects that are just now taking on this hype, which is annoying because they take advantage of the hype and then they come in and, oh, look what we're building. And then they throw something together and it looks good. But to see like these builders that have been building throughout the bear market, and despite the FUD and the uncertainty and all this stuff going on in the markets, I'm just like really excited from what I've been seeing, at least on Sovereign's end. Obviously, I'm more involved in Sovereign as a community member. I'm not affiliated with the team or anything, but just seeing what is being built and the thesis behind why they're building and the chain, the bridge, and all of that. I think, like was mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to L2s, and I think that the bridge with RSK has really held up through all the transferring and stuff. And I think that there's credibility there with being existing for as long as it has been without any issues from what I really know of. But then I guess the other issue that Hero Gamer brought up is this idea of funding. And so unfortunately, these projects that are almost like a pyramid scheme, and not pyramid scheme, but have these tokens are highly incentivized through the token and the tokenomics, that these fundraisers can really maximize their profits. And so there's incentive alignment there that really takes away, in my opinion, a lot of the actual building that happens that could be really beneficial for Bitcoin. And unfortunately, I think that those are the kind of projects that get hyped, and you see a lot of Wind Moon in Discords and stuff. But in reality, there's not a whole lot of new innovation going on. And so that's what's frustrating to me. And seeing what Sovereign is building behind the scenes, I'm really excited about. And despite tokenomics, like the FUD on the price and all of that, I think that overall the team just continues to deliver, and I'm excited for what they're bringing to RSK.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, I got to run, so I'm gonna say my goodbyes. But this has been a fantastic space. I'm just looking at I'm watching the crowd as we're talking, and you attract a very wide audience, which is great to see, because Travis here with Rootstock, and Corey, I think, was originally building on ETH. Mike, I think he came from the Luna ecosystem, which started out in Dirty Laundry Mike. But so we have all these different builders. I saw some people from ICP earlier, from like the ICP Foundation, someone from Polkadot who's now building the build on Bitcoin initiative, which is like Alexei and some other people. Really good group of people. They just have an open-minded take on what it means to be a Bitcoiner, which to me that makes me the happiest, because I remember when I came up from Stacks to being a broader Bitcoin podcast, I had an identity crisis of, am I a Bitcoiner or am I a shitcoiner? I don't even know what that means. And eventually I just came to terms of it doesn't matter what their opinion is. I believe that Bitcoin, the asset, is the strongest asset in crypto, and how we make it more productive, as long as we're aware of the trust assumptions and how it's built, like none of that shit matters. Let people decide. You can do custodial, and that's fine, as long as it's people are aware of it. The entire design space should be explored. It's my thing. Yeah, just happy to chat and great group of people. So yeah, thanks for hosting, Tomas. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for all the nice things that you said. This is a relatively new spaces. We've been doing them for only a couple months, but we've been very diligent and hosting them every week, sometimes even twice a week. And yeah, we're trying to talk with everyone. So I'm glad that we are attracting people from all the different ecosystems, because yeah, there are not a lot of places where people from the different ecosystems can gather and have these types of conversations. So we also appreciate all the work that you're doing with the Built on Bitcoin podcast. And we held you already way too long, so we're going to let you go. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We do these spaces every week at this time, this day, on this channel. Next week, we're going to have the experts team, and then we have a lot of stuff planned out, so stay tuned. We'll see you next time, and Jacob will be very happy to host you again whenever you have time, or whenever BTC Frontier Fund wants to announce a big milestone or anything. Just get in touch, and let's continue to build the new Bitcoin culture centered around builders. That's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Awesome.
And yeah,
love it. Thank you so much, guys, and take care.
Take care, everyone. Thank you, Hero, for joining again. Travis, Henry. When the audience joins, it's always so much better. See you next time.